Welcome back, and here is conversation number 4 for the Nicene Creed. We've been talking about belief and doubt, and yesterday we talked about theology. Theology means, talking about God. We talked a lot about the word logos, though. We went a long way with that. And we also talked about theology's definition provided by St. Anselm of Canterbury. Do you remember what that definition was? If it is not in your notes, you need to go back to lecture number 3 and its very first slide and find out what Anselm's definition of theology is. Then we introduced Thomas of Aquinas. Do you remember the order that he belonged to? If you do not remember the order to which Thomas Aquinas belonged, its official name and its nickname, then you need to go back to the last lecture or go ahead and use Wikipedia. Find out what order Thomas Aquinas belonged to so that you can have that in your notes. Now, Aquinas was from Italy, but he taught in Paris, just like Anselm. And there is another story about Aquinas that goes like this. Some of his brothers came to him and they said, Thomas, you have to go visit the nun at the monastery next door. There's a nun over there who levitates when she prays. So, Thomas didn't really care, but at the behest of his brothers, he went ahead and went and visited this convent. And when he came back, his brother said, Thomas, what did you think? See, they weren't joking this time. Did you see her levitate? What did you think? And Aquinas just shrugged his shoulders and he said, I had no idea that nuns wore boots. Now, it's a silly story, but the point it is meant to illustrate is this. For Thomas Aquinas, nothing that God does is surprising. God does amazing things. When we finished talking yesterday, we were looking at Aquinas' 5 proofs for the existence of God. And I told you we were going to look specifically at number 3, the argument from necessary being. Now, this is sometimes called the argument from contingency. There's Mr. Dodge's very clear writing. Okay, but you're going to see it come up. The idea is that things that exist are contingent upon other things that exist. Contingent means based upon. So here's the argument from contingency. And you'll see I just lifted this from Wikipedia, so you can go find it. It doesn't matter if you change it now because I've got the screen capture. Okay? If you've heard contingency before, then you probably have heard it like if your parents have sold a house or something like that. Maybe they made an offer on a house, but it was contingent upon their house selling. Okay? So if we look at, we'll just start at the beginning. So we're talking about scholasticism, right? So these are kinds of philosophy. There's metaphysics, and metaphysics, meta means above or after, and physics means physical. You already know that. So metaphysics is philosophy that is interested in what is beyond the physical. Okay? It's interested really in pretty much everything. What laws exist, what it means to be, things like that. Now, scholasticism, maybe you recognize the word scholastic. Scholasticism is a specific kind of metaphysics. Now, if you recognize the word scholastic but you can't place it, just think about the books you used to buy in elementary school. Scholasticism is a kind of metaphysics that is based on authorities. Authorities. Now, as the name suggests, it is a philosophy employed by people in schools. Now, we're talking about the universities of the High Middle Ages. Sometimes Aquinas is referred to as one of the schoolmen. Now, I say that it's metaphysics that makes reference or appeals to authorities. By the way, I hope you're defining metaphysics and scholasticism. So Aquinas, for example, will regularly reference, well, let's see, a few things. He'll reference the Bible, right? No big surprise there. He'll reference a group of people who we call the Church Fathers, okay? No big surprise there. He will reference St. Augustine of Hippo. He'll reference Aristotle. And sometimes we'll simply call Aristotle the philosopher. Aristotle was the most famous pupil of Plato. And Plato, of course, is the most famous pupil of Socrates. So these are Thomas Aquinas' authorities, okay? And Thomas Aquinas himself developed scholasticism in such a way that sometimes it is referred to, or his brand of scholasticism is referred to as Thomism. Please make sure to write down Thomism as the metaphysics or scholastic philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. He would hate that name, by the way. So we're looking at Thomism here. Let's go all the way back up to the top of the page. In the scholastic era, Aquinas formulated the argument from contingency, following Aristotle in claiming that there must be something to explain why the universe exists. Since the universe could, under different circumstances, conceivably not exist, its existence must have a cause. Not merely another contingent thing, but something that exists by necessity. That is, something that must exist in order for anything to exist. In other words, even if the universe has always existed, it still owes its existence to an uncaused cause. Aquinas further said, and this we understand to be God. Now here's one way to think about this. You have existence. Who gave you your existence? Your parents did. But they, like you, are finite beings. They got their existence from someone else. Well, their parents. And on and on and on we can go back into the past with each being's existence contingent upon another being's existence. Well, what Aquinas is getting to is there must be something that simply is existence. Let's look at the second paragraph. Aquinas' argument from contingency allows for the possibility of a universe that has no beginning in time. It is a form of argument from universal causation. Aquinas observed that in nature there were things with contingent existences. Since it is possible for such things not to exist, there must be some time at which these things did not, in fact, exist. Thus, according to Aquinas, there must have been a time when nothing existed. If this is so, there would exist nothing that could bring anything into existence. Now, what he's saying is we're recognizing that everything is finite, everything has an ending, everything passes out of time. And if everything passes out of time, that means everything has to begin in time. That means there must have been a time when there was nothing. This is a problem, because you don't get nothing from nothing. Contingent beings, therefore, are insufficient to account for the existence of contingent beings. There must exist a necessary being whose non-existence is an impossibility, and from which the existence of all other contingent beings is derived. If we jump down to the bottom and look at Leibniz's 5 points, okay, it's going to sum it up. Every contingent fact has an explanation. You know, this chair exists because you built it. You exist because of your parents' love. There is a contingent fact that includes all other contingent facts. Therefore, there is an explanation of this fact. This explanation must involve a necessary being. That is to say, things that are based upon the existence of other things cannot at the same time be the source of existence for everything. There has to be something that simply was. And that something that simply is or simply was is what we call God. Now, please notice, guys, that doesn't sound very biblical. It doesn't sound very touchy-feely. As a matter of fact, you might need to pause this recording and stretch your limbs a little bit, flex those biceps and calves, stand up, do some up downs, get the blood flowing a little bit, because that was heavy stuff. But here's the point that it's trying to make, okay? You've probably said this before. I've said it before. Fine, I'll accept it. God made everything. But who made God? And you see, boys, Aquinas would tell us that's a great question for someone who doesn't understand what we mean by God. When we talk about God, we are talking about this necessary being. This being who simply is. His existence is not based on or contingent upon anything else's existence. You got it? It's just talking about the beginning, boys. It's all got to start somewhere. You get nothing from nothing. So there must be something. Well, that something is what we're trying to open up to. Right? If we allow ourselves to consider, so Dr. Sam Johnson, who lived in the 1700s in Great Britain, compiled the first dictionary as we understand dictionaries. He commented once that a man really needs only three things. He needs shelter, he needs clothing, and he needs food and water. I know food and water is only two, but we're just talking about sustenance here. And it really shouldn't matter the state of his coat or his home or even his food. All he needs to do is survive. But of course, you and I both know from experience that if we can have a finer coat, we would like to have a finer coat. And if we can have a better burger, well, we'd rather pass on that McDonald's cheeseburger and get something a little bit tastier. And certainly, if we could have a nicer home, most of us would look for the nicer home. Now, maybe not larger, maybe you're a minimalist, but you'd still like it to be nicer than just a ramshackle shed. Well, that suggests that we as human beings seek for something more. But here are some quotations from Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity. Man does not regard seeing, hearing, and touching as the totality of what concerns him. His world is not marked off by what he can see and touch. He seeks a second mode of access to reality, a mode he calls faith, in which he finds a decisive enlargement of his whole view of the world. Think about how limited one's view is if he cuts himself off from faith. Because if he cuts himself off from faith, he's also cutting himself off from love. We act again and again on faith. There's a certain science involved in the ignition of a vehicle, but you still believe it's going to start when you turn the key. And that's why when the car doesn't work, you say, I can't believe it didn't start. You have faith that the food you eat is safe. You have faith that your parents love you. And even though you know people can lie, you believe them. Faith, again, is a decisive enlargement of one's whole view of the world. Belief signifies the decision that at the very core of human experience, there's a point that cannot be nourished and supported on the visible and tangible, that encounters and comes into contact with what cannot be seen and finds that it is a necessity for its own existence. We need more. And this is why we seek love. We're not satisfied with just good enough. There's an inherent need, an inherent belief that there's something bigger out there. And in a sense, faith is the belief that God has set us free because he loves us. And his hope is that we will convert, that we will turn back to him. Soren Kierkegaard is another philosopher. Write down his name. Soren Kierkegaard. First name is Soren. He was a Scandinavian philosopher, and he very famously taught about the leap of faith. Now go ahead and practice his name because it's fun to say. Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard. He said that we have to take a leap of faith, right? That, I can take a piece of paper with times tables on it and prove to you that 3 times 3 is 9, or that, I don't know, the square root of 25 is 5. I can prove things like that to you, right? But when it comes to faith, again, all I can say is I can't really prove it to you. You have to accept it. You have to make the leap of faith. And so this is where we might recognize that faith gets a bad name for being boring or behind the times, but it really is an adventure. Do you have the gumption to say, I believe, even when things are difficult, really especially when things are difficult? Do you act in faith, even in those moments? Do you believe that God is with you even when things are bad? And even when people turn against you? Naysay you. Call you a goody two-shoes or something. Do you maintain the course? It's hard. It's hard to wait. It's hard not to be part of the in crowd. Sometimes that's what faith calls us to do. It calls us to be unpopular. But for that very reason, it also provides us with a life philosophy, a guiding principle against which to examine our own lives. And of course, Socrates famously is credited with saying, the unexamined life is not worth living. When you are old and on the verge of death, do you want it said of you that you were consistent, you were a rock, you were an exemplar of stability, a man who knew who he was? Or do you want to be seen as wishy-washy? Belief represents the risky enterprise of accepting what plainly cannot be seen as the truly real and fundamental. And only in lifelong conversation can we become aware of what it means to say, I believe. Now, when we look back on our lives, what do we see? Well, we have just a little bit left to do, but we are at the 20-minute mark. So, in lecture number 5, we'll talk specifically about metanoia and navi, 2 ideas that I do strongly want you to comprehend. Until then. You got excited there, didn't you? I'm back for an encore. I can't erase, I can't back up. We have really 2 more slides after this one. So let's talk about these 2 words just a little bit. And then in a later conversation, maybe we can be more specific. So write down the definitions of those 2 words. Metanoia, a Greek word meaning to see again. And you notice that in parentheses I put repent. In the gospel, this is the Greek word used for the word repent. John the Baptist cries out, metanoia, metanoia, repent, see the world again. Navi is a Hebrew word. It's the Hebrew word for prophet. But look what else I wrote. A madman. He who stands upon his head. And these are 2 great words. So we've got, let's say, 4 minutes. Let's see if we can finish this at 25. The Navi is the guy who tells you that there are scales on your eyes. Now let's think about it this way. Little kids are very good at calling out fairness and that which lacks fairness. When you were younger, if your mother or father gave your brother more ice cream than you received, you probably cried out, "That's not fair." Now, as we grow older, we also grow colder to fairness. You might look around and see things that you once had thought of as unfair and no longer called them such. Rather, whether it's ill treatment or doing things people shouldn't do or saying things they shouldn't say, you've just shrugged your shoulders and you've said, that's the way of the world. People blaspheme, people smoke, people cuss, people maltreat others. It's none of my business. Well, the Navi is the guy telling you, maybe it is your business. Maybe you're supposed to see unfairness. Maybe this isn't the proper way of the world and you are blinded. And you say to this Navi, you're crazy. You're a madman. You, my friend, are not standing on your feet. You're upside down, you fool. And then the madman says to you, metanoia, take another look. You've done this before too. Have you ever watched a show that you loved when you were a kid and you realized it wasn't that good? Eaten food that you loved when you were young and realized there are a lot better options out there? Or conversely, have you ever shared a song that you love with somebody else and listened to it again as though it were the first time you'd heard it? Or explained a game to a younger brother or sibling and experienced your first joy with the game all over again when you see him enjoy it? So metanoia is powerful. So what if you said, all right, listen, I understand what you're saying. You're saying the world's messed up, but I say, Navi, that you're on your head. And what if the Navi says, okay, maybe I am on my head. Maybe I'm standing upside down. But what if, just like the rabbi, what if you're the one standing on your head? And then you say, you know what, fine. I'll give it a try, just to humor you so you'll shut up and I can move on. And what if you stand on your head? Just to humor the Navi. But having now stood on your head, now that you're experiencing metanoia, now that you're seeing the world anew as though for the first time, you realize you've been on your head this whole time. You're the one who was not seeing the truth. And now you are. Well, guys, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is the Rocky Mountains. I actually took this with my iPhone 4 a long time ago. There's this great line from C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce. Will you come with me to the mountains? It will hurt at first, until your feet are hardened. Reality is harsh to the feet of shadows. But will you come? You see, guys, in this story, people have traveled from hell to visit heaven. And and they have a chance of staying. It's a kind of purgatory. But they find that they are incorporeal. They're ghosts. They're very weak. And heaven is more real than anything you could imagine. And so when they step off the bus and onto that grass, the grass, have you ever walked outside on gravel in your fresh spring feet before you've got your summer soles calluses? That's what they're experiencing. It's almost painful. But the angels who stand there tell them, you can do it. You can, the longer you walk, the stronger your feet become, the more real you will be. Will you come with me to the mountains? Imagine what you can see from up there. Reality is harsh to the feet of shadows, but will you come? Well, guys, the one who begs of us to come with him, the one who doesn't force, but just asks us to join him, is the Logos, is Jesus of Nazareth. All he's saying is, what if there's more? What if the world is so much larger than you ever could have imagined? What if?